The heels of my shoes thudded on the marble floor of the restaurant as I walked past the slender rows of tables where people in expensive suits and elegant outfits were sitting, talking in hushed voices, as if loud noises were something indecent in this atmosphere of luxury and subdued light. A waiter in an immaculately ironed uniform opened the door to the private alcove lounge for me with a slight bow, and I stepped inside without hesitation, immediately noting the subdued light, the soft glow of candles on the table, and the muted aroma of expensive wine that already filled the room. Gregory Sullivan rose to meet me, his tall figure clearly outlined against the dark paneling of the wall, and his face, as always, retained that expression of cold confidence that made him a dangerous negotiator and an even more dangerous competitor. I had known him for a long time, much longer than Tech Excellence itself had been aware of his presence as a threat, and our meeting tonight was not an accident, but a long-planned step, the finishing touch to what I had been preparing from the moment I realized that my time at the company was over. Becca. His voice was even, calm, without unnecessary emotions, but there was something like satisfaction in his eyes as he pointed me to the seat opposite him. "It's good to see you." "Greg." I nodded, sitting down at the table and setting aside the menu that the waiter had brought. "I take it we both know why we're here." He chuckled a little, picked up a glass of wine and took a small sip, studying me over the glass. "I've always loved your bluntness. Yes, we're not here for dinner, although—" He waved casually at the waiter, ordering something without having to look at the menu. "I think we can afford to enjoy a good wine before we get to the details. And before we continue, write in the comments from which country and from which city you are watching this video. We are very interested to know from which corner of the planet our video is being watched. Enjoy watching." I crossed my arms over my chest, watching him. I didn't want to prolong this conversation, but I understood that he loved control, loved playing the game by his own rules, and if I wanted everything to go smoothly, I should at least play along for a few minutes. "I've done my part," I said, leaning forward a little. "I'm officially leaving the company on Friday. I have all the documentation, all the calculations, all the internal tests. They won't have time to block the channels if they try to fix something. By that time, you'll have everything." Greg nodded, his gaze becoming a little more attentive, as if he was listening not only to the words, but also to what remained between the lines. "And you're sure they won't suspect that you've taken something out?" He leaned back in his chair, calmly examining me. I just grinned. "They are too busy with internal intrigues. They're so sure that I'll just give up and leave quietly that they didn't even bother to check what access I had left." Greg took another sip of wine, his gaze sliding over me appraisingly before he spoke again. "So you're really ready?" I held his gaze. "If I wasn't ready, I wouldn't be here." He nodded, clearly satisfied with my answer, then took a thin folder from the inside pocket of his jacket and placed it on the table in front of me with a light pop. "The contract. The conditions are as we discussed. If you sign up, you'll be on the staff of Precision Systems starting on Monday." I exhaled slowly, but not from excitement, but from the clear realization that every step I had taken up to this point had not been in vain. I picked up a pen, ran my eyes over the document, even though I knew what would be written there, and without hesitation, I put my signature at the bottom of the page. Gregory Sullivan smiled. "Welcome to the new game, Becca." Thursday began with the obligatory formalities, accompanied by forced smiles and artificially sympathetic speeches that the HR staff seemed to have memorized, trying not to make eye contact with me, as if they were afraid that I would throw some truth in their face that would destroy their illusion of a corporate order, where everyone was an interchangeable cog, and dismissal is just a minor reallocation of resources. I sat quietly in the conference room, signing papers in which the company officially said goodbye to me, paying me a standard severance package. But none of these papers mattered anymore, because the real farewell was not here, not in these walls, but where the people who really knew the value of my work. They looked at me with confusion and hope, afraid to ask the question that was clearly on their tongue. When I returned to my office, there was already a small envelope on my desk with a short note from the team. just a few lines written by hand without any formalities, but they touched me the most. Becca, we can't imagine this place without you. You weren't just our leader. You were the one who made us better. Thank you for everything. The signatures of the 6 people I had worked with in recent years, with whom we had created what was now the basis of the company's work, were scattered at the bottom of the page, and I knew I would not let them stay here, abandoned like unnecessary parts in a mechanism that worked only because they believed in it. Value. We have seats for all 6 of them, if they're interested, Greg said that night at the restaurant. And now I had to make them understand that this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. I called each of them one at a time, taking my time, allowing the conversation to proceed at a natural pace, listening to their questions, their doubts, their fears of the unknown, because no matter how much they were hurt by what was happening, they were still holding on to familiar ground, even if it had long crumbled under their feet. Becca, said Laura, one of the most talented engineers in the team with whom we developed the initial principles of the algorithm, if you leave, then everything is really bad. But what should we do? They'll leave us here, but everything will go wrong without you. They won't just leave you. I looked straight into her eyes, making it clear that I wasn't going to soften reality. They will try to use you until you become useless. I want you to think about what you really want. I can't make decisions for you, but I have an alternative. I saw how that word touched her, how something was ignited in her that had previously been buried under the fear of losing stability. The others reacted the same way. Some immediately agreed, others asked for time. But I knew that on Friday, when I finally left this building, I would not have to look back. When Victor Lawson called me into his office on Friday morning, I was already expecting this. The glances he had been throwing in my direction over the past 2 days were too insistent. The discussions in the management circle became too intense. HR tried to complete the process of my dismissal too quickly, as if he was afraid that I would change my mind and I'll start asking uncomfortable questions. Sit down, Becca. He didn't even look at me. His attention was focused on the screen, on which, as I assumed, the analyst's first guesses were already flashing that my work at Tech Excellence was coming to an end and what it might mean for the company. I sat cross-legged across from him, allowing myself a barely perceptible smile when he finally looked up from the screen and looked at me with an expression that should have looked friendly, but was given out by an overly tense jaw and a slight glint of irritation in his eyes. I hope you understand that this isn't personal, he began, and I tilted my head slightly, waiting for him to continue, because I was really curious what excuses he was going to use. The company is changing, and we have to adapt, but I would like to thank you for your contribution. Victor. I smiled slightly, leaning back in my chair. If you really wanted to thank me, you would at least try to find out what exactly I created. I saw him tense up, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly, his fingers tightening on the armrest of his chair, because he realized that I knew, but he didn't know yet how far my move had gone. Don't worry. I leaned forward. You won't have to spend time studying the documentation, because on Monday morning you'll figure it out for yourself. He stared at me for a few more seconds, and then slowly leaned back in his chair, crossing his fingers into a lock. What are you up to? I smiled, got up from my seat, and without saying another word, headed for the door, leaving him in his office, in his company, which in 3 days would realize that it had lost not just an employee, but a person without whom their technology would soon cease to be theirs. After leaving the building, I breathed in the cold air, allowing myself a moment to enjoy this feeling, a sense of freedom, power, control over my own destiny, which I had not had for many years, while I endured, observed, analyzed, so that now I could take the only right step. My phone vibrated and I took it out of my pocket, knowing it was Greg. Did everything go smoothly? His voice was flat, but I could hear the hidden curiosity in it. Better than you'd expect, I smiled, looking at the horizon where the evening was already burning out against the backdrop of tall buildings. Then I'll see you on Monday. Yes, I nodded even though he couldn't see it. On Monday. I entered the Precision Systems building with the same confidence that I had been hiding for a long time behind the professional politeness and habitual neutrality that accompanied every meeting at Tech Excellence. Here, in a new space filled with hushed conversations, the rustle of business activity, and the faint smell of freshly brewed coffee, I felt more than just freedom. I felt power over my own destiny, which the old company had taken away from me for so long, forcing me to play by someone else's rules. The reception area was spacious and bright. The glass and metal walls did not feel cold, as in the offices of excellence, but, on the contrary, seemed modern, but not impersonal. There was a dark-haired woman in an immaculately tailored suit at the reception desk who looked up as soon as I got closer. "Good morning, Becca." Her voice was warm but restrained, as if she knew exactly who I was but wasn't going to give it too much thought. "Gregory asked you to come straight to the conference room." I nodded, accepting the guest pass from her hands, which would soon become permanent rather than guest, and headed for the elevators, noting to myself how the space was organized here, unlike Excellence, where even senior executives lived in a world of closed doors and intrigue. Precision Systems felt like a company dominated by a different mindset. Maybe that's why they won this race. When the elevator doors silently parted, I found myself in a long corridor leading to a conference room where the key figures of the company had already gathered. Through the glass walls, I could see Greg sitting at the head of the table, his attentive gaze riveted on the large screen, on which, apparently, the final preparations for the presentation were already underway. I entered, feeling the eyes of those present on me. Some were just curious, others looked at me with undisguised respect, understanding who I was and why I was here. Greg stood up, smiled, and motioned for me to sit next to him. "Becca," he said as I sank into a chair, "I'm glad you're here." "I'm sure I'm glad." I chuckled slightly, flipping the documents I was holding in my hands in front of me. "Let's get right to the point?" He nodded, and one of the technical directors brought up the first page of a document that was supposed to be a blow to Tech Excellence. "Or, as you know," Greg began, looking around the room, "this morning we officially announced the signing of an exclusive license for distributed processing technology developed by Becca. This algorithm increases the efficiency of computing power by 43%, which gives us an undeniable advantage over our competitors." There was silence in the room, filled only with the soft sound of keyboards clicking and slow nods of approval. "Victor Lawson," Greg continued, giving me a look of hidden satisfaction, "has most likely already received the notification." I knew that Victor hadn't just received the notification, he was probably already furious, realizing that Tech Excellence hadn't just lost me, but had missed something much more important, the technology on which their future was built. I turned my gaze to the screen where the key points of the press release were highlighted. My name was now next to Precision Systems, and next to it was my official title, Director of Innovation. I leaned back in my chair, watching as my past finally retreated back, and in its place a new chapter arose, a chapter that I wrote myself. I smiled softly, noting how different my name sounded here at Precision Systems, not just Becca, as at Excellence, not the faceless one of the team, not the shadow behind other people's presentations, but Dr. Jennings, a title I earned over the years, but which is so rare. It sounded where it really should have been used. Greg watched me go, head cocked to one side, his eyes clearly satisfied with the way the situation was developing. "This is your moment, Becca," he said, smiling a little. "Let's show them how real professionals work." I nodded, picked up the tablet with the prepared materials, and headed to the main conference room, feeling a familiar excitement. Not anxiety, not fear, but the same mixture of excitement and complete self. Confidence that happens before an important speech, when you know that you have something to say and people are ready to listen to you. When I entered, the room was already almost full. Several dozen engineers, analysts, project managers, technical leaders, whose eyes immediately turned to me, and there was not a shadow of doubt in these looks, only interest, respect, and, I noticed it immediately, admiration. They knew who I was, they had read the news, they understood exactly what kind of upheaval had taken place in the industry this morning, and now they were waiting to hear what would happen next. Good morning. I put the tablet on the table, but I didn't immediately turn on the presentation, just looked around at everyone. We have a lot of work to do today, but first I want to say one important thing. I paused, giving them a chance to focus, and continued. I know many of you have been following the news this morning. I also know that some of you may be wondering what this whole situation means for Precision Systems and for you personally. Let me answer right away. This means only one thing. We have the opportunity to create something truly great. I saw someone in the audience nod as someone quietly straightened up in his chair and someone smiled, feeling in my words the same confidence that they themselves had. The algorithm that now belongs to us is not just a new technology, I continued. It is the basis for future products that will change the market. But that's not all that matters. The important thing is that you are the people who can make it better, take it to a new level, turn it into something more than it was in tech excellence. And we have all the resources, all the necessary experience, and most importantly, all the freedom we didn't have there. I turned on the screen, which displayed the familiar graphical representation of the algorithm architecture, but now it has been supplemented with new elements, the very improvements that I developed on my own, outside of working hours at Excellence. I'm not going to tell you what to do, I said, turning to the team, because I know that the best people in the industry are sitting in front of me. Instead, I want us to do it together, so that each of you does not just do your part of the work, but brings your ideas, your expertise, and your passion to this project, because it's our project now. The audience responded with silence, but it was the silence that spoke louder than words, the silence of people who had already made a decision and were ready to work. So, I turned the screen to the next slide where the first stage of technology integration into Precision Systems products was described. Let's get started. The questions started pouring in immediately. Someone was already flipping through their notes. Someone was typing something on a laptop. The technical leaders were talking to each other, discussing the details. And I realized that this was the moment when the team starts working as a real team. And that was what it was worth going through everything for. What happened in recent weeks. My place was no longer there, in the cold walls of Excellence, where I was considered just a piece of machinery that could be replaced. My place was here, among people who believed in what I believed in. I stood at the window of my office holding a cup of black coffee in my hands, watching the sun slowly creep towards the horizon, painting the glass facades of skyscrapers in warm, golden hues. On another day, in another life, in my old life, I might have felt regret. Regret for the years I spent at Tech Excellence, for the people I worked with, for having once put my whole soul into a company that didn't even consider it necessary to give me a chance to fight for your place. But today, I only felt satisfied. Everything is going according to plan, Greg's voice came from behind me, and I turned to meet his gaze. He was standing in the doorway of my office, holding a tablet with the latest reports in his hands. To be more precise, even better than we expected. I put the cup down on the table and came closer, glancing at the screen. Any new movements? Victor has officially requested an appointment. Greg chuckled briefly, running his finger down the list of notifications. And he did it not by himself, but through the legal department. Obviously, they have realized that their position is precarious, but they are not ready to admit defeat yet. I crossed my arms over my chest, feeling the corners of my lips twitch in the shadow of a smile. I wonder what exactly they want to discuss. Judging by their recent statements, they intend to resolutely defend their technology. That's why they're stalling. Greg nodded, tossing the tablet onto my desk. They're trying to find a loophole, but as you know, there isn't one. I picked up the device, scrolling down to the latest legal opinion. As expected, our position was impeccable. All the documents, all the timestamps, the entire amount of work that I did on my own equipment and outside of working hours. They could dispute anything, but the facts remained the facts. We'll give them time to digest this, I said, closing the tablet. They are not ready to accept the terms of licensing yet, but soon they will have no choice. Greg grinned with satisfaction. I like the way you think. I shrugged, glancing at the report he'd left. It's not just thinking, it's an experience. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my email was inundated with notifications. Tech Excellence continued to pretend to be in control of the situation, but I could see that in reality they were losing control. Their key customers started asking questions, employees started updating resumes, and investors started panicking. The message from Miguel arrived at exactly 4:15 p.m. They are trying to retain employees. Victor announced loyalty bonuses, but judging by the conversations, it won't work. Your name was mentioned more often today than the name of the company. I smiled. Miguel knew what he was doing. He knew what was going on behind closed doors, and he only gave me the information that really mattered. And all this meant only one thing. Tech Excellence was collapsing under its own weight, and they had no one else to blame for it. Monday started with headlines that were impossible to ignore. Every major business publication, every industry blog, and every analytical review discussed the same thing. Tech excellence in crisis, a strategic mistake turns into a financial disaster, and the loss of key technology threatens the company's future. I was flipping through the news feeds over a cup of morning coffee, watching how discussions were multiplying, how journalists were vying to comment on the situation, how market analysts were already beginning to predict possible scenarios. And in all these scenarios, my name sounded more often than the name of Victor Lawson. Tech Excellence has officially acknowledged that they will either have to license the technology from Precision Systems or find a way to develop an alternative. A statement released by their press service said that the company was confident in its ability to adapt and that the transition process is already underway. But anyone who knew anything about the industry understood that this was nothing more than a desperate attempt to save face. Miguel texted me at 7:45 a.m., before I even got to the office. Victor held a meeting for the leaders. He looked like he hadn't slept all night. He said that we have the resources to build everything anew. Even the most loyal people in the audience didn't look convinced. The accounting department is already starting to count losses. I grinned as I finished my coffee and put my phone in my pocket, knowing that today's events were just beginning. At 9:30 a.m., Greg walked into my office without knocking, with such an expression on his face that I immediately understood. The news came sooner than we expected. They made a move. He tossed the folder onto my desk, sitting down in the chair opposite. I took the documents, skimming the headlines. Tech Excellence has officially filed a notice of the start of the trial. How interesting. I slowly put the folder back down, crossing my arms. And what are they basing their claim on? Greg grinned, clearly enjoying it as much as I was. It's a complete bluff. They claim that the technology was developed within the walls of Tech Excellence and is their intellectual property. Of course, he leaned forward, they are well aware that your documentation is impeccable. But this is the last chance to make us nervous and offer them more favorable licensing terms. I shook my head, grinning. Victor really doesn't know how to lose with dignity. Exactly. Greg leaned back, watching my reaction with pleasure. And that's what makes the situation even more funny. Literally an hour after the notification was submitted, their lawyers contacted our legal department again. It seems that they want an open dialogue about possible cooperation options. I laughed. In other words, they are well aware that they will lose, but they want to stall for time and see if they can get something out. Exactly, Greg grinned. And here's the question. What should we do about it? I picked up my tablet and scrolled through the latest financial reports and articles related to the Tech Excellence crisis. Their shares fell by another 5%, and the company's total market value decreased by 18% in just 2 weeks. Customers have already begun to consider alternative solutions, and several major partners have officially requested proposals from Precision Systems for a possible transition. We had them in a vice, and they knew it. I looked up at Greg, smiling slowly. We're not doing anything. Nothing at all? Excitement flashed in his eyes. Nothing at all, I repeated, crossing my legs. Let our lawyers give them a standard answer that we are studying their claims. No negotiations, no concessions. Let the court schedule a preliminary hearing. Let the lawyers of tech excellence spend thousands of dollars a day trying to convince the judge that black is white. The longer they hold on to this lawsuit, the deeper their losses will be. Greg grinned with satisfaction, shaking his head. I like the way you play. I've been sitting backstage too long while someone else was taking advantage of my success, Greg. I leaned forward, looking him straight in the eye. Now it's my time. By noon, the situation for tech excellence had worsened even further. Two of the largest corporate clients officially notified them of the contract review, citing supplier instability. This meant that the companies that had been paying millions for their software no longer trusted them and were looking for an alternative. Miguel sent another message. People are panicking. On the sidelines, they say that the board of directors has begun to consider a possible replacement for Victor. One of the council members is said to have called his actions catastrophic. I couldn't help but smile. My phone vibrated on my desk. Incoming call, Victor Lawson. I tilted my head to the side, watching the blinking screen. He finally broke down. I let the phone ring for a few more seconds, then pressed the button and lifted the receiver to my ear. Victor, what a surprise. There was a tense pause on the other end of the line, then a voice was heard, which now had neither arrogance nor confidence, only fatigue and carefully concealed irritation. Becca, we need to talk. I smiled as I looked out the window of my office, beyond which stretched the city that now finally belonged to me. I'm listening. I paused, allowing the audience to digest my words, watching as journalists frantically typed notes and technicians talked among themselves, discussing what they had heard. I knew that my report would have a resonance, but now, standing under the floodlights, looking into the hall filled with representatives of leading companies, I realized that it was more than just another presentation. I was talking about something that has been hushed up for too long, that in a technological world built on ideas, the people who create these ideas have too often remained in the shadows. How many times have engineers, developers, and scientists created something revolutionary, only to have their work presented under a false name? I looked around the room, seeing some people nodding, recognizing their own experience in these words. How many times have company executives, chasing short-term profits, lost people who could lead them to real breakthroughs? A chart appeared on the screen behind me, showing the decline in tech excellence stocks over the past 3 months. I didn't say them out loud, but everyone in the room knew who I was talking about. Companies that don't understand the value of their people face consequences sooner or later. The only question is how destructive they will be. There was silence in the hall. I knew that these were not just abstract words. It was a warning. It was a signal to everyone who had ever looked at their developers as resources rather than as a force driving their business. I took a deep breath, glancing at the last slide of the presentation. Dewar. But today, I don't want to talk about the fall. Today, I want to talk about growth, about how we can change the approach, about how companies can create an environment in which innovations flourish, and the people who create them receive well-deserved recognition. Because the real success is not just the numbers in the financial report. These are the people who make this success possible. The audience burst into applause. After the speech, there was a queue of people who wanted to ask questions, discuss ideas, or just shake my hand. That was amazing, Becca, one of the analysts said, holding out a business card. Your case will become a case that will be analyzed in business schools. I smiled as I accepted the card. I was just telling the truth. Greg found me a few minutes later, holding 2 glasses of champagne. You just set a new benchmark for the entire industry. He handed me one of the glasses. I think tech excellence is nervously watching the broadcast right now. I chuckled slightly, remembering how just a few months ago Victor stood on this stage, confident that his company was unshakable. Let them watch. I raised my glass, meeting Greg's gaze. They need to see what real innovation means. I ran my fingers along the edge of the envelope, feeling the smoothness of the paper, which hid an invitation that represented not just another performance, but something much more. An official recognition that I was not just part of the industry, but one of those who change its rules. It's ironic, isn't it? Greg raised his glass, watching me with that half smile he always had when he saw how things were shaping up in our favor. Just a year ago, Victor thought that he was getting rid of the superfluous link, and now tech excellence is forced to follow the principles that they rejected, a story that is now being told in business schools. I smiled, shaking my head slightly. Actually, Greg, it's not even a revenge story, although I admit I used to like to think so. This is a story about what happens when a company forgets that its main value is the people who create it. Innovation is not born in faceless conference rooms, where reporting is more important than ideas. They appear where people have the freedom to think, experiment, and know that their work really matters. Greg nodded thoughtfully, twirling the stem of his glass with his fingers. And now, you've become a symbol of that. Your name is strongly associated with change, and not only at Precision Systems. Even your former employers were forced to recognize your value, even if it cost them millions. I laughed, looking at him over the rim of my glass. Yes, but they didn't do it willingly. They were forced by circumstances, a lesson they'll remember for a long time. He chuckled but didn't say anything, letting me just enjoy the moment. I turned my gaze to the window, behind which the city was drowning in the soft gold of the setting sun, reflected in the glass facades of the skyscrapers. For many years, I worked in the shadows, watching as my ideas became the foundation for other people's successes, as my achievements turned into tools for the ambitions of those who saw developers as just a convenient resource. I endured, watched, analyzed, and then took the only right step. Now, a year after I was asked to clear the table, I was sitting in a spacious office in a company that saw people as their true value and drove innovation forward not as part of someone else's success, but as its creator. I opened the envelope, scanned the text of the invitation, and then, raising my glass, met Greg's gaze. For a change, Greg, for the future. He smiled, raising his glass. To the people who really created. The glasses collided softly, filling the office with a crystal clink. I took a sip, knowing that this was just the beginning.